Welcome to Take One Whiteboard, where we are capturing in-the-moment conversations with thought leaders on practical solutions towards getting better results. Take one means it is literally one take, unrehearsed and spontaneous. Participants trust the energy of the moment and feel free to explore and share their thinking, often in rapid exchanges with layering of ideas. This can feel unconventional, but the resulting discoveries are candid and honest. We do our best to leave it unedited. I am Stuart Morse, and thanks for tuning in. Hello everyone, we're here today with Victor Perr. So tell us who Victor Perr is.
Okay, thank you, Stu. My name is Victor Perr, and I'm a graduate of engineering from Purdue University. I've spent over 32 years in the industrial engineering capacity. I've worked for a company that developed and manufactured heavy motors, heavy-duty motors, and natural gas vehicles. And so over the years, I've come across a large number of challenges with regards to organizing and motivating and directing teams of engineers.
So Victor just stood up why he's here today and why we're known Victor for a long time and why we're here to talk to him. So you've laid out that you've seen a lot of things, been in the industry from the engineer's perspective. So what kind of percolates to the top of your mind of kind of the general things that you think leaders need to be aware of?
Leaders in the engineering community today have a number of challenges to face. They have cultural differences to begin with.
All right.
We have a multicultural environment today, much different than 50 years ago, where that was more segregated. Now it's more amalgamated. We have to recognize that there are different cultures, there's different world experiences from people. And so that is the first thing that leaders of our engineering communities need to recognize. The benefit of that is that from a multicultural approach, we have a lot of unique experiences and perspectives that we have to learn to harness.
Right.
And from that generates our challenge. We as leaders need to approach things not with our perceived or learned perception about things, but we have to be willing to open ourselves up and listen. Frankly, listen to more than talk in many cases.
Interesting.
And so, culturally, it is very important to understand where people have come from so that you can develop a means of connecting to those people.
So part of that, if I heard you correct, is you've got this 50 years today, it's very amalgamated. I think you said it's got the diverse, unique experiences. So a leader needs to embrace this.
Yes.
And listen and
yes. He needs to recognize the fact that this is his palette. This is what he's going to take, his colors, his textures.
So he or she.
He or she. This is, yes, absolutely, more so than ever. The leader is going to have to take what he has on their palette today and learn how to move forward with that. And so understanding the diverse group of people, resources, and experiences is first and foremost in today's modern technical organizations.
Right. So do you have a way that you, I mean, here I'm kind of drawing to what you're saying. Do you have a way that you kind of look at that, the way you kind of draw it up or simplify it for folks?
Yeah, I think the most important way is to develop a simple means of mapping out what you have to work with. Again, depending on the type of industry you're in, depending on the type of products you're working in, and frankly the type of technology that you're working with, you will have very specific types of cultures that will come to bear, but most important, the types of people and assets that will bring to bear.
How do you go about mapping that so other people can understand what you're thinking about? I mean, is it drawn it on whiteboards?
I guess it's a simple inventory of sorts. You can simplify it down to inventory. If you cannot write down and put into pictures what it is you have to start to work with, you're going to be at a disadvantage going forward. So from an inventory perspective, I think it's important to recognize that in today's world, we have moved from developing products centrally in some area of the world with the mindset that that one product is going to serve satisfactorily to all corners of the world.
So are you talking, if I heard you right, are you talking about supply chain centrally cored up traditionally?
There's certain aspects of the development process. So first of all let's go back to the very beginning.
So not essentially execution or delivering the process, but the developing of it.
It's development of it. So we have today a multicultural world we live in.
Right.
And each of those geographical as well as cultural differences in those geographic areas have unique requirements. And first and foremost in today's development, product development world is to understand what those requirements, those unique requirements are.
So on to earlier what you said. In the past you would develop it in a space where you would, and today you're bringing in this global diverse way,
yes.
all these
inputs. In the past, you would have a group of people that were drawn primarily from a low diversity, let's call it, culturally low diverse pool.
Okay.
And that group of people would come up with ideas, thoughts, and requirements and needs that may be important and typically were important to that group, but had very little relationship to the market in which they were hoping that their end game was to take a product and bring it to those other markets on different continents, different cultures. So today, what's very important is to recognize the fact that through multicultural, multi-geographic, and just multi-variable needs we have around the world, you must first understand those differences exist, and you must have a means to identify and categorize and objectify.
So that's
what
where
those
you're coming into
are.
this map.
Yes.
To move forward.
Yes.
Is there a way that you found, just if you were standing with a group of leaders and you were talking about this, I mean, do you lay it out in a secular manner of how you would move through that, or how would you draw that for us?
What we would typically do is, and I think the most effective and least complicated way is, we would come up with a type of a tree diagram. Okay, we would understand that whatever the product or service is that we wish to excel at in the marketplace, develop and excel in the marketplace, you need to be able to break it down to 3 primary areas. And from those 3 primary areas, then you would move to further break those down. And then as you worked from the left to the right, this is how you are going to deliver on this aspect of it. So it's a bit of a map.
What are these 3 areas? Are they these, or does the problems, or does the problem statement stand? Do you not know? Are those all agile on?
These
what defines
these can be financial, they can be functional, okay, and there's always a timing aspect to things as well, okay. And we are here today, and we have an understanding today of what's needed tomorrow. Because let's face it, anything we're developing today is to serve a need that is going to be still important tomorrow, right? So your timing, your projected timing on things is very important. Functionality, I think it's very important that you understand what are the key characteristics of your product. We have a terminology that we use called fit for market. Okay, FFM is a means of communicating.
And that falls in within here?
Yes, fit for market. So FFM refers to every market has its unique fits, its unique needs. And if you are going about developing a global product, that product needs to be developed with a mindset that it has enough options to it, enough variables available to it, so that it can be adjusted to fit the various market needs around the world.
Which comes back to this. I mean, how does that come back to this? I mean, what you said earlier.
What the multicultural aspect of it, again, is that if you look at North America, Canada, U.S., Mexico and on down, right? You look at what North America has, even within North America, we have a multi-fit for market requirement, because what we use here in the U.S. and what we'd be happy with using in the U.S. and meets the requirements of the people in the U.S., the people in Canada might see differently. And more importantly, the people of Mexico will for sure see differently. And on down to Brazil or Argentina, it'll all vary. So culturally, there are people that are accustomed to certain things in their marketplace. They're accustomed to what things should cost relative to what they have been paying for. They're accustomed to certain functionality they can expect out of products. In North America, it used to be that if your car lasted 10 years, you were very happy about that, right? Today, we expect our vehicles to last a lot longer.
Does that fall into this then, the time piece?
The timing has to do with the changing expectations, okay? When I refer to timing here, I'm talking about 50 years ago, expectations were different than what they are today, and the expectations 10 years from today will be different. And I'll digress a little bit around environmental factors, for example, right? 50 years ago, right, there was a certain mindset about what it meant to be eco-friendly, to be green, right? And we've all experienced from decade to decade since then how the definition of that has changed and how the practical aspect of that has evolved. So in the future, which is, again, the time factor here.
So you're actually, what you just said is you're breaking this out.
Much like that. It's very important to break this out because you have to be able to anticipate.
Okay.
As time goes forward, you have to be able to anticipate how are the expectations of our markets and ultimately our customers going to evolve. Because everything we develop today is on a type of a cycle, right? It's going to take us 2 years, 3 years, possibly 10 years, depending on what the product is you're working on. If you're working on a spacecraft to Mars, that's on a completely different time frame than if you're working on a new motorcycle or a new vehicle that's going to hit the market, right? We can use the automotive industry as a very good example. It used to be that the automotive industry would launch substantially new type of a vehicle within 8 to 10 years. And as we've seen, outside factors affect that cycle, like emissions, fuel economy, performance. These things have accelerated and evolved so much that now it's every 3 years and possibly every 2 years that our automotive industry has to change. So what they're constantly doing is they're looking forward. They have to be visionary, and they have to know today what to work on so that when they're done and ready to launch it, they didn't miss the boat, right?
Very good.
These are the complexities of a fast-moving market with multicultural expectations. So one of the things the global leader of today needs to understand is that there is no single solution that fits all cultures. And you need to be able to put that into some objective, tangible terms that allow you to define what those different cultures, different geographical areas of the world will consider a desirable product that's going to delight them when they buy it and they start using it. So it's one of the challenges that I've observed.
If I can just hit pause for a second.
Sure.
Even this is an honest one-take conversation. I just need you to take a couple steps in on camera.
Sorry. Okay.
That's all right.
Got it.
So, and part of that, everyone, this is part of this honesty. Mm-hmm. This is I noticed he was moving out. Didn't know for sure, but bring him back into the scope of the whiteboard.
Good.
So let's get back on what you were just saying. That this leader and about the diversity, they need to understand this large scope of what's going on culturally. Mm-hmm. That's a big change from the skill set from 50 years
mm-hmm.
ago. How does that? Well, I had two questions. Well, the first I wanted is around that's, and you've talked a little bit about it, but maybe we can kind of hit a simplified piece of what do those leaders need. What's a simple way to put that around so a leader goes, I get that.
Mm-hmm. Very, very important, every leader needs to understand is that this situation exists, right? Without understanding and appreciating that that situation exists and there lies the challenge, they will not head in the right direction. They will not use the right approach to yield the right results that they need to in this case. So what's happening...
So that's the main piece.
Yeah,
I mean, if you don't have that, you're not moving.
And again, I'll refer to the time continuum factor of this as, this may be today's situation. You have to be able to project where that situation's going to go. Because again, you are developing something, you're pulling a team of people together, you're creating a vision, you're energizing those people, you're trying to get them all on board to start rowing in the same direction so you can get there as soon as possible and as efficient as possible. But you need to know that when you finally get to that finish line and you're ready to present that product to your intended market, that market hasn't moved on.
Right.
Or somebody hasn't come in and beat you to it and disrupted your thought.
So where is that? So you're bringing the engineer's perspective. How much of that is falls to engineering?
Okay, engineering.
And I may have boxed it too much, but you can reframe that if you'd like.
Sure. I think when people come up with traditional thought of engineering, there's this execution aspect of it, right? The engineers pick up where the marketing and the voice of the customer left off, right? You, as any modern company knows today, you have to be very effective at collecting the voice of the customer.
Okay.
At the same time, why you have to recognize the fact that we all go shopping today to find the things we didn't know we needed. Okay? If we never saw that new thing and got to realize and understand how it could simplify or improve our lives, we never would have thought we needed it, right? So an engineering organization, an engineering leader relies heavily on his company's voice of the customer functionality and effectiveness to bring that to objective terms.
So if I heard you correct, this is how the term engineer has evolved. Mm-hmm. That it's not about execution, but I know in our work in this still lives. Mm-hmm. This role or label. Usually it's this. We have found that this older term or belief, bias, falls with people who are not in engineering. So it's a way that's still looked at engineers from the outside. They say, oh, they're linear, they don't know that kind of stuff. They don't have the emotional intelligence. But listening to you describe, you're describing someone who has what we would call IQ and EQ. I mean, we have this knowledge, but we have to have the awareness around an emotional intelligence of what the voice of the customer is. So the way you're redefining or what it means to be an engineer now, it's not just execution.
No, the engineer cannot be satisfied today with just taking something that a marketing person, for example, has traditionally handed off and
then just go head down.
And just go head down and go deliver this.
Well,
right?
not what you were standing up over here sounded like. So someone who's trying to go out and market analysis and this kind of understanding.
The engineer of today is much more involved in the marketing voice of the customer process.
Okay.
And I think that's a very important aspect for leaders today to realize that if you're isolating your engineering organization from being able to interact directly with the customers, you are missing out in a very big way. Because what the mindset of a traditional person who may be developed around the marketing voice of customer, the engineer will see something that person didn't recognize. right? It's the diversity aspect of it, not only culturally, but I think you brought up earlier the emotional intelligence is one spoke of that wheel. I think today you'll find in the engineering organization that you've got a lot of different types of people, but they do have common denominators, okay? But what you need to relish in are those differences in those people, because that's what will bear the best outcome in the end, okay? So having emotional intelligence to see the differences in your people, but also recognizing that there are common denominators there that make them effective at what they do. So you will have to execute. Don't get me wrong. There's a point in everybody's work day where you have to deliver, you have to execute. But how you prioritize, and what you're delivering is very important these days. And how you're communicating to the other people on your team, where you are and where you're headed and what you need is also very important. So the communication factor today is very important.
I drew an equilibrium sign here about delivery with an equilibrium with the voice of the customer, that these two things need to be going back and forth. So, and you know our model of this idea around, IQ to EQ, or and that the more analytic to the more creative. What you just said I thought was interesting. It got me thinking was this common denominator it can live a little bit everywhere, but as a starting point, there's this common denominator of what we know to be true about engineering. But then the diversity of our backgrounds and where we come from, and now it's to where in the past it could have lived here.
Right.
But we talked about this idea that it's holistic, and this thing needs to operate to where you're constantly spinning this.
Right.
And you're aware of that.
Right. If you could take individuals and you could represent them with a simple illustration like this. This is the core of a person, and this arm represents some of his diverse factors that he brings in. And there may be various branches off this. But now consider you want to build a team. And you have multiple people, right? And this looks like some stick figures upside down, right? But what you want to do is you want to take these people and you want to overlap their common denominators, right? So what you're seeing is you see a team develop here where their common denominators bring them to a relative term. But what you're seeing is that every one of these are catching, and the diversity they bring catch various aspects.
So they're like nodes that are out there that are picking up information and bringing it back to the mothership.
If
interesting.
If you use a biological model, right? If you look at a virus, right?
Right.
It has certain features about the outside of that allows it to connect and talk to others. But the point is, there will always be a core common set of denominators that an engineer in today's modern company will have. What you want, though, is you want to have diversity out at the peripheral where they can catch bits of information, bits of awareness.
So diversity out here.
Yes. And what you've created is a central pivot point where you can all spin around and connect through. But again, each one of these are going to be able to catch something and to be able to do something that they couldn't do on their own.
So we have a diagram, and I'd like you to overlay that onto this. We've done a diagram in the past where it's it's around alignment. That aligning on this around a vision to be able to go forward. And to be able to move forward.
Right.
And when you drew that, I would almost is the vision your center dot? I guess are you talking about more about capabilities, or just that this is what we hold in common? This is what we align
There's
on?
a basic set of tools and skills.
Okay.
Right.
So you would put tools and skills here.
Yes.
Okay.
There are tools and skills there. Let's use the Swiss Army knife as an example, maybe as an analogy, right? If you ever go to the Swiss Army knife, selection, there's hundreds of these things, right? But they're all Swiss Army knives.
And they all have a blade.
And they all have a blade. But from there, they rapidly diversify, right? And depending on what your task and what your job is, you're going to pick a different knife that has different tools and different blades in it. When you go on that expedition, you want to make sure you got a selection of various knives to take along that will have those different set of tools that you can use at any point in time. So think of an individual as a Swiss Army knife. And how many types of Swiss Army knives with their varying sets of tools do you need to have on board with your team so that you're going to be ready to take on any situation that pops in front of you there, right? I mean, but they're all knives, right?
Yeah.
They're all Swiss Army knives, but they do bring some unique skill sets to them.
So what are some of the constraints that you've seen that around being able to do this? And we've got this term from 50 years, and now we're doing this and talking about these pieces. In your experience, what are constraints that you've seen? That things that you've run into. You say, I got to reframe that.
Yeah, from a leadership organization perspective, I'll always go back to the cultural differences we have today. Very rarely will you find a company that's considered successful, okay, that hasn't brought on board multicultural individuals. Right? They may, as individuals, they may be very well experienced with the world and the various cultures and the various languages and communications. But you will always have a group of people that may not have that exposure, may not have that understanding. As a leader, you need to bridge that gap. You need to communicate effectively the benefits of the variation you have with the people on your team and why it's important to seek out and to bring on board the type of variation that your team needs.
Interesting.
Once you have that variation, you then have to take the task on, as I point out here before, you need to start pointing out to each of those individuals the common denominators. Piece, right? Yes. As people, you need to find the common denominators they all share.
Okay.
If you cannot find the common denominator among the people of your team, you will have difficulty getting everybody to row in the same direction.
So could you write it like a fraction like that? Variation over common? What they have in common?
Absolutely. You could see that the amount of commonality proportion to the amount of variation. Okay? There's an optimum ratio there somewhere, right? But most importantly is that the variation and commonality, they're dynamic. They're not a static state. Anybody that comes from a different country and decides to make America, for example, their home, they will develop new commonalities with the North American raised
what you said,
individual.
it's organic.
Exactly. But they will never lose the variation they came with. Okay? What's very difficult is to create variation within a static or I'll refer to it a bubble, right? If you take an individual and you hope that he's going to develop a different or diverse view on things when everything around him stays the same, it's not going to happen.
So that's really interesting what you said is it's hard to create this. It's better to go get it.
It is something that you need to seek out. It is very difficult or time-consuming, inefficient to use that term, to try to organically create it. You absolutely need to be organic in your approach to educate and to explain the importance of these things.
You can educate and explain the optimum ratio in the equation.
Yes, but the variation will need to come most times from the outside. You cannot organically develop an individual who sees the world differently all of a sudden. You have to hire that and that already has to exist in somebody's head, right?
So, great insight. I think we kind of landed on something here that distilled, at least for me, listening to you, distilled a lot of this down. So, what's the the basic message that you would what's the basic message of why should leaders be thinking this way?
The leader of today, whether he's leading an engineering organization or whether he's leading a marketing organization or a sales and service organization, a leader that doesn't from the very beginning recognize the differences.
So you're coming right back to this.
Yes. The situation exists around the world that in some cases there are cultures that are fighting. They're fighting the outside forces that want them to change, to assimilate. They're fighting to maintain their unique cultures.
They're fighting the natural equation that is actually an advantage.
Exactly. There are cultures that identify by their differences from everybody else around them, and they don't want to lose that. And in today's society, in today's business, you need to recognize that and develop methods that you will preserve that.
Use it as a driver.
And use as a driver. And again, when you are traveling from A to B, you have many different paths you can take. But one thing's for sure is that there's always going to be one that's going to be a little bit more efficient and one that's going to get you there in better conditions, let's say, than you would otherwise. But culturally, I guess I have to refer back to the term culturally. Culturally, there's differences. And the differences can be both from your side of how do I harness that and use that to execute and deliver something. From the other perspective, you have to understand that the cultural needs are going to be so different anyway. So having the ability to see it from both directions is going to be critical for the leader today. I think
Very good.
Recognizing variation has to come from the outside, but commonality has to be established from the inside. Without having the ability to point out to everybody on your team, in your organization, what we all share in common and what we will all agree is desirable for each one of us, you're not going to get everybody to row in the same direction.
Very good. Very good. Well, this has been very insightful. Thank you for your time, Victor.
I appreciate the opportunity.
Nice job.
There's always a lot more to go with that. So thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. Victor
Thank you.
Perr.
We hope you found value in what we have captured, and we look forward to seeing where you will take the conversation.